To work around that, we got two options. Option one is that we pass our props to the dynamically rendered component. There actually is a syntax we could use for that, and I did add a text lecture about this syntax in the last module after the dynamic component lectures. But I'll not use that here. Instead, I'll use that provide inject feature we learned about so that we also can practice this again. And for that, I first of all want to move my stored resources from app.view, so move this key and the array, and bring it to their resources.view. That of course means that we can now get rid of the data property in app view because we no longer have any data in there. But now in their resources.view, in this component, we can add this key, we can add the stored resources to our data here. And now I want to provide those stored resources so that in the stored resources component, I can inject them. And you learned how that works. For this, we can now add the provide key and add it in its method form so that there we return an object where we can provide our resources and point at the stored resources we have in our data property here. And with that, we're providing the resources to all lower level components. So to all child components and child components of child components. And that means that in stored resources, we now only need to change one thing. Instead of getting resources as props, we need to inject them. So that we inject this resources key, and that is the key I'm providing here, and with that we get access to those resources here. Just like that. So now with all of that done, I of course need to go back to app.view though, and use the resources component we've been working on. So import the resources from /components learning resources the resources.view and register this as a local component here in the app config object so that here in the app template we can render the resources and hence render this component we've just been working on. And with that, if we reload, here we got our tabs, and we can switch between these two components, and we see the stored resources there as well. Now, let's maybe highlight which tab is currently selected, because currently that's not easy to see, and thereafter let's of course work on adding resources. But to quickly highlight the selected tab, we can go to the resources, which is where we have these buttons, and in there I can set the mode depending on which resource is selected. So I will bind the mode here of this first button, which is used for selecting the stored resources, and check if the selected tab is equal to stored-resources. If it is, I want to use the default button style, so then I'll set the mode to null and not pass in any mode at all. But otherwise I'll set it to flat, so that if the other tab is selected, this first button has the flat style. And since having all the logic here in the template is a bit ugly, though it's also not horrible, but since I don't want to have it here, I'll grab it and instead add a computed property. So here I'll add computed, the computed option, and add the stored res button mode, and return this result here. Now, of course, referring to this selected tab. And we can also already add the add res button mode. And here return this selected tab, checking if it's equal to add resource. And if it is, we'll set it to null, otherwise we'll use this flat mode. And now we got these two computed properties. We can now use them in the template to bind the mode. So here, mode is bound to stored res button mode, and on the other button, the mode is bound to the add res button mode, to the other computed property therefore. And now with that out of the way, this looks much nicer. So let's next work on this add resource screen, and let's make sure we can add resources.